Who's Ramy? What does he practice?
Graduated law school back in 2015 and have been practicing personal injury and medical malpractice for the past 10 years almost in New York and New Jersey. We've handled complex cases, simple cases, motor vehicle cases, slip and falls, medical malpractice, and various degrees, whether complex or simple. We handle it all.
When should clients reach out to us after an accident?
It's preferred that a client reaches out to an attorney as soon as they are away from the accident scene. Obviously, it's difficult to tell somebody to call a lawyer immediately after an impact because they are probably overwhelmed with what just happened. They need to talk to the police, to witnesses, to ambulance workers. But obviously, it's preferred to talk to the lawyer immediately just to kind of understand what is going on, to make sure you're not hurting your interest by saying certain things to the police or to the witnesses. But realistically, it's just easier for people to kind of follow the lawyer's instructions as they give these videos. And then when the accident happened, leave the scene after you do the right steps, calling the police, documenting everything, exchanging information, getting yourself checked by the doctor. And that's when usually people call an attorney to kind of navigate the process.
We represent some immigrants and, some of them have this complaint. The police officer didn't understand me. And so he just wrote what the other person said. Or the police officer I felt was biased against me. And so do you recommend these people call us right at the time of the accident?
If you have difficulty communicating with law enforcement personnel who arrive to the accident scene, it is highly recommended to speak to your attorney that you've been working with on your immigration case, or in general, talk to the office and see if somebody can help you translate. We actually had a case today. I had a deposition that was a contested deposition, and the defendant in the case does not speak English. He speaks Cantonese. And throughout the deposition, he was talking about speaking to the police and talking. And in the end of the deposition, he said, "I don't speak English." So my question was, how did you talk to the police if you don't speak English? Obviously, that showed inconsistencies in his testimony. It showed that what was listed in the police report is not something that he had told them because they never took his statement. So it's always important to put your story out there, to try to include it in the police report at the accident scene. To try to later amend the police report and add your statement is a very difficult process. And if the police officer had spoken to you and given you a chance and you didn't speak, it becomes even more difficult. The only way to try to change the police report is if you actually didn't give a statement whatsoever. So if, for example, somebody gets picked up from the scene, police arrive 20 minutes later, their statement was not taken, yes, the police will actually go to the hospital and go meet this witness or this victim and ask for their story and include it in the police report. But if you do it on the spot and speak to the police officer, then if it's not communicated properly, they're going to take that as your statement, even if it's against your interest and does not reflect actually what happened.
Okay, so if they call you, how do you help? Let's say someone had an accident and the police are on the way and they call you. How do you help in that case?
So obviously sometimes if I'm doing something, they'll call me twice. If they call me twice in a row, I do have calls where people call me from the accident scene. If they call me twice or three times in a row, then I know it's an emergency. Or they'll text me, say it's an emergency. So I'll call and I advise them about how to proceed. Obviously, every lawyer tells their clients to talk less, but obviously this is an accident scene where you do have to give a testimony to the police officer on the spot. And we tell them just to say exactly what happened, very briefly what happened. Let's say it's a rear end collision, right? You just have to say to the police officer, I was stopped or was moving and a vehicle rear-ended me. That's it. There is no need to go into further details because all of that information can come through your lawyer at a later stage. But you don't have to say the speed of the vehicle. You don't have to see that it was a minimal or heavy impact. Just as simple as how the accident happened. Make sure they get the story of how the accident happened. Everything else, the gravity of the impact, your injuries, what you thought at the time, what were you distracted with at the time, all of that stuff you don't need to say to the police officer. To the police officer, you only say what happened. Keep it simple, just several words about how it happened. Don't give any excuses, don't be defensive. Even if you're partially at fault, you can still say it. That's okay. As long as you're simple, keep it very short and sweet. Tell them what happened. If they ask you further questions, you could say, look, I have an attorney. I'm going to speak with them. They could furnish the remaining piece of information.
Okay. Let's talk about workplace accidents. What are common workplace accidents? And after a workplace accident, what are the steps a person should follow?
Obviously, work accidents are common. The most common work accidents involve trip and fall, for instance, at the workplace. If it's the kind of job that requires a lot of labor, carrying boxes, certain things like that, some people develop back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain that prevents them from actually going back to work or continuing to perform their jobs. Every employer is required by New York and New Jersey state law to carry workers' compensation insurance for their workers. And that insurance would cover the medical bills and the lost wages in case the person is out of work. And usually at the end of their workers' compensation case, they're also able to recover a certain amount of money to close their case. Workers' compensation law in general is a different type of law than personal injury, which is the reason why you notice that a lot of lawyers who do workers' compensation do not necessarily do personal injury and vice versa, because it just involves different areas of law and different laws in general. A lot of times people are told that you have a workers' compensation case, and then, they just think that's the only thing they have, because you, under workers' compensation law, in New York at least, you cannot sue your employer for personal injury case or for a personal injury claim. You could only make a workers' compensation claim. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to encourage employers to employ people without the fear or the hesitation that, the larger number of employees I have, the more likely I'm going to have a liability or personal injury claim. So they made the workers' compensation law and said, okay, you know what? If you're injured at the job and you're at your employer's premises, you cannot sue your employer directly for personal injuries. You're only entitled for your workers' compensation benefits. The nuance to that is a lot of times people call us and they realize that they actually do have a personal injury case and a workers' compensation case. So I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody's working at a hotel, and the hotel owns the entire building, maintains the entire building, runs the entire building. The restaurant, all the facilities are all owned under that same corporation. And you have a hotel worker who goes into the restroom, working at the time, trying to clean the bathroom, whatever is their duty, slips and falls in the bathroom, sustains a fractured ankle, for example. In that case, you only have workers' compensation claim, right? Because you cannot sue anybody else except for your employer, which you're not allowed to, so you only have a workers' compensation claim. But let's present another scenario where you're working at that hotel, but the bathrooms or that main floor rooftop that this worker was at is maintained and run by the rooftop restaurant, which is a different corporation than the hotel. So in that case, you can have a workers' compensation with your hotel employer to cover your medical bills, your lost wages, and whatever benefits you can get from the workers' compensation claim. And then you could sue the rooftop restaurant for personal injuries. So it's always important to obviously talk to an attorney about that, investigate the facts. Right now, we currently have a case where there's a hotel worker, and the hotel itself obviously owns the building, the premises, but there are so many different contractors within the hotel that maintain different areas of the hotel, so including this rooftop restaurant. And the first question I ask my clients is, where does your pay stub come from? Because that really determines who your employer is. Who did you sign a contract with? That determines who your employer is. If the contract and the pay stubs come in a different name than the hotel, then there is a way to make a claim for both personal injury and workers' compensation. But yes, there are two different fields. They are handled differently in different courts, but a lot of times people have two claims going on at the same time, especially for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, because if they have the application on and if they have passengers in their vehicle and they get, God forbid, into an accident, rear-ended by another car, then they'll have a workers' compensation claim with a company in New York called Black Car Fund, and then they'll have a claim against the car for personal injuries. In New Jersey, it's a little bit different for Lyft and Uber drivers. They treat them as independent contractor in New Jersey, so they're not entitled to workers' compensation benefits. But the claims administrator for Lyft and Uber, either it's Liberty Mutual or Allstate, they actually do hire insurance companies to administer their claims. They offer something called MedPay, and that MedPay is up to $10,000 of medical benefits. And then when it's exhausted, unfortunately, no insurance will pay for the medical bills. In New York, on the other hand, the New Yorker Black Car Fund, as drivers are dropping off passengers, they will see in each ride that a small amount of money, one goes to Uber, amount goes to him or her, and then the tip goes to him or her, but then there's a small amount that goes to New York Black Car Fund. That's their workers' compensation carrier. And in New York, the workers' compensation carrier pays up to $50,000 to medical bills, and whatever that carrier pays over the $50,000, they will claim 2/3 of that from the client's settlement. So I'll give you an example. Let's say the client goes through treatment of a year and a half, has several surgeries, and the workers' compensation carrier pays $80,000. The personal injury lawyer sues the defendant, recovers $120,000, for example. Okay. On a regular case, let's say the insurance carrier only paid $50,000, then they will not be claiming anything. The personal injury lawyer will take their third from the $120,000, and the client will be entitled to $80,000 in their pocket. But in a situation where the workers' compensation carrier had paid $80,000, then they're entitled to that $30,000, or to a portion of that $30,000 from the client's settlement proceeds. So again, let's go back over the same numbers that we discussed in the previous scenario. The personal injury lawyer recovers $120,000, and the workers' compensation carrier paid $80,000. The workers' compensation carrier will be entitled to 2/3 of what they paid over the $50,000, so they will be entitled to $20,000 of the client's proceeds. That would be a lien on the case that they would claim. So in that scenario, the client would receive $60,000. Workers' compensation carrier will receive $20,000, because that's 2/3 of what they paid over the $50,000. And then the personal injury in turn will take their regular third that they would take in any scenario. So all of that information is obviously relevant to Uber and Lyft drivers and workers in general to kind of understand. If it's a New York case and it's a slip and fall or just the premises liability, then the workers' compensation carrier actually is entitled to the entire 2/3 of the amount of money they paid, even if it's under $50,000. So it's always good to keep track of the bills that are being paid. You know, sometimes what they call, you can't double dip. So for example, you can't recover all this money from your workers' compensation carrier and then expect that not to be taken into account when you recover from the personal injury matter, or vice versa.
Okay. So for you to have a workers' compensation claim, does there have to be some sort of negligence in you getting injured?
No, and that's why the workers' compensation field is just a little bit different than ours, because personal injury lawyers at Onal and Ramy, we obviously look at who's at fault. Workers' compensation, what matters is an injury happened, that you're disabled, you're unable to work. It doesn't matter who's at fault. They tend to take more cases that come in for people who are interested in recovering under workers' compensation law, because it doesn't matter who's at fault.
For a typical case that has a workers' compensation claim and a personal injury claim, it has to be one where there is some sort of fault, right? Some sort of negligence.
At least on the defendant's side.
Right, on the defendant's side, plus some injury, right?
Right.
Okay.
My understanding from workers' compensation law, mainly in New York, is that workers' compensation really focuses on extremities injuries like shoulders, knees. And my understanding, and without quoting me on this, but I believe that because of the spine issues could be chronic. It's hard to prove and relate to working in general, because back injury is usually chronic. But if you have like knee, shoulder, wrists, ankles, then it's just easier to prove, I believe, in their field.
Gotcha. So let's talk about Airbnb accidents.
So with Airbnb cases, you have to make sure that you are under the Airbnb agreement when you go in. There are a lot of Airbnb hosts that try to tell people, hey, let's do like a side deal. I'll give you a cheaper rate. That's very harmful, because by doing it that way and you don't have anything with the Airbnb, you're removing yourself from responsibility. You're removing Airbnb from the coverage. And then all you have now is the coverage from the household, which you don't know if it exists. And you don't know if the household insurance, if they find out that you are an Airbnb guest, they may deny coverage. So I had a situation myself where we had an Airbnb, we stayed, and then the host came and said, hey, can we do, if you stay in a little bit longer, we could do this like off the books. And I immediately, known as an attorney, of course, I immediately said no. I'd like to have Airbnb cover for any potential damage or negligence to be protected. Now,
so assuming that it is Airbnb and you get injured, then what happens?
Then a good attorney would sue the Airbnb and the host of the house, their insurance as well. Because it's Airbnb's responsibility that they have checked the house, they made sure it's safe. So yes, I would sue both.
Who pays the medical bills?
In a situation like that, when it's not a car accident, usually the medical bills are either covered by the person's private health insurance, or what they call a lien is basically knowing that when the medical provider knows it's a case, they'll treat the patient, they'll send you the bill, they'll get paid on a prorated rate from the settlement proceeds. Some very small insurance companies numbers, they actually will call the attorney and say, hey, we actually have like $10,000 in something called MedPay, but very rare.
What are typical Airbnb personal injury cases?
Well, the common incidents that happen in Airbnb is either trip and fall, hazardous conditions, right? So, for example, we had a recent case that we considered where a family walks into the Airbnb, they get locked in. The way it was set up is that as soon as you close the door, there's no instructions, nobody called them about it. As soon as they closed the door behind them, they got locked in, they couldn't get out. And so the father had to go through the back to kind of try to retrieve some sort of key or anything like that. So he goes through the back, and there is actually a stairs that is not surrounded by any like railing or step or anything like that, and he ends up falling in, and he ends up with a fracture and a surgery. And obviously, you know, on this situation, it's both the Airbnb and the insurance company are on the hook, and that's who you sue. Now, how they deal with each other, the companies, and who tries to get out of the case, that's a different story. So, for example, when the household insurance carrier realizes it's an Airbnb situation, they may file a motion, say, we're going to remove ourselves from the case, judge. I would like to be dismissed from the case because this was an Airbnb arrangement. That's not something we cover in our policy. That case could be thrown out against them. But no matter what, in a case like this, Airbnb will still be on the hook.
What is Airbnb's coverage for situations like this? And what coverage do you look for on the house?
Usually, Airbnb has a coverage of $1 million per incident. The coverage you look for is just personal injury. It's just called liability. There's no, for example, medical expenses. There's no like loss of income. It's just general liability, premises liability.
But that's covered under the homeowner's insurance.
It can be covered. It depends on the person if they had purchased their own household coverage. But a lot of people don't have that, right? So if you don't have that, then it's just strictly Airbnb.
When you're buying a house, though, most lenders require homeowners insurance.
They require until a certain period, and then if you fail to pay your premium or they cancel it because you had a claim and you don't purchase another insurance, I don't believe the mortgage company is going to call you the next day and say, hey, please make sure you have insurance. We have a lot of incidents where houses are uninsured.
Okay.
Like more common than you think.
Using someone else's Uber account. That's a common thing.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, obviously,
some people are
it goes without
renting
saying.
out, right? Some people are renting out. What happens if you get in an accident using someone's Uber account? One, let's say you're at fault. Two, let's say you're not at fault. Do you have a potential claim?
Obviously, that goes without saying. You know, if there is any sort of misrepresentation to any insurance company, somebody's driving without authorization or not permitted or not listed on the policy or anything of that sort, then the coverage is removed from that person. So you're really driving without insurance. So obviously, it's very important that you don't have some sort of arrangement that you believe you get you a coverage denial because you misrepresented to the insurance company either your address, who's going to be driving the vehicle. If Uber or Lyft give you an account, it's supposed to be for you. If you give it to somebody else, then there's going to be no coverage. Even Uber and Lyft are not on the hook if you get sued because they don't know who this person is. It's not like they have vetted the person. They're not negligent for hiring that person. You can't sue them for negligent hiring. You can't sue them for negligence because they did not have that person in their policy. And it's a breach of contract. So we have a case right now where you have to have a primary insurance like State Farm, Geico, when you drive in New Jersey, and then you can drive Lyft. I even remember the section, it's in paragraph 10, in the Lyft agreement says you're required to have a primary insurance when you operate the vehicle. If you don't, then this policy doesn't apply. This person failed to pay their premium, and the accident happened, and they couldn't recover. Why? Because they breached a contract. Lyft would not cover their injury because they breached the contract with Lyft. Right? So it's very important that you abide with the policy you purchased is. The whole exchanging Uber accounts and having somebody else is virtually like having no insurance. It's a misrepresentation. Lyft and Uber, all their coverage will not cover that new person, and they may even deny any coverages for you, even retroactively, because you breached the contract, right? With them.
So let's say you rented your Uber account to your friend and your friend got in an accident and they were the one at fault. Who typically is the other side going to sue? Are they going to be able to go after your insurance?
Well, the other side is going to sue your friend. They're going to sue you, and they're going to sue Lyft and Uber. Lyft and Uber are going to get themselves out easily because they're going to say, I don't know who this person is. We never gave them the policy. They're out. So it's just going to be you and your friend. And then if you...
personal.
Yeah, and if you don't have any assets, they either sue you, they get a judgment against you, and put a lien on your income or property, or whatever you have, you'll settle with their lawyer and offer them some money. But Lyft and Uber will most certainly not cover the situation whatsoever.
Right. Okay. Construction accidents. Summer is in, full mode. A lot of construction is happening. What are the most common types of construction accidents? And if someone were to have an accident, what should they be looking out for?
So obviously, to always follow the safety precautions and safety instructions and procedures is always at most importance in these situations and construction accidents. But from an attorney's perspective, going back to the situation where you cannot sue your employer under workers' compensation law, a lot of these construction sites, if you understand these principles and you understand how these laws operate, a lot of these construction sites have a general contractor and then subcontractors, right? So the employee has to figure out who they are employed by. Okay, so let's say I'm the cement person. That's the contractor I work with. That's where I get my pay stubs. That's my contract. And the negligent act occurs because of the steel contractor, the person who brings in all the metal. I know it's a different company. And that metal piece, for example, falls or flies in somebody's face or something like that. Then you could have a workers' compensation with the cement company employer, and then you can have a personal injury claim against not one contractor, but several other contractors on the site that either supervise the site, but especially the steel contractor, for example. Let's say you're on a scaffolding and you're the cement contractor employee, and the scaffolding falls, right? Then you can have a personal injury claim against the scaffolding company and just the general contractor and whoever is kind of managing the site, making sure it's safe. And then you'll have a workers' compensation claim with your own employer's carrier. That's kind of generally how it's understood, and it's just important to understand those principles, and that's how you approach these cases. In construction cases and motor vehicle cases, a lot of the questions we receive is whether or not I'm in status or out of status. It obviously does not matter, because if your employer is retrieving benefits from you as an employee, then you're entitled to those benefits, okay? In some situations where it's a motor vehicle accident and you do not have legal status here and you don't have a driver license, or the way the driver license was obtained was not necessarily proper, that's obviously a different situation. But let's say you're a pedestrian and you get hit by a motor vehicle, then it doesn't affect the case, at least from what I've seen in the past 10 years, in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. Delivery. Let's say you do Uber Eats, right? And then you're delivering food. When you get to the house, dog comes out and dog bites you. Do you have just a personal injury claim against the homeowner, or do you have a workers' compensation?
So you'll have a workers' compensation claim against the delivery company that you work with, and then you'll have a personal injury claim against the household. So if you're just working with a delivery company, obviously they had his own insurance, then you'll go that route. But Uber Eats, DoorDash do not actually carry workers' compensation insurance. They deal with their workers as independent contractors. So in that case, there will not be any coverage. So the bills would have to be paid either by personal insurance or on a lien if the case is actually successful. But that's generally the way it's handled.
Let's say you're a passenger, right? And you just took an Uber and someone re-rents you. You and the driver are injured. Who can the passenger open up a personal injury claim, and what about the driver?
So in a situation like this where the driver and the passenger get rear-ended and it's 100% the other party's fault, then they'll have a personal injury claim against the defendant's vehicle, and they'll have an uninsured motorist vehicle claim against Uber and Lyft, right? The driver will also have a workers' compensation claim, but this is New Jersey. There isn't workers' compensation, so they'll only have met pay. So is the passenger. So both of them will have a met pay coverage through Lyft and Uber for $10,000. And then they'll have that uninsured coverage through Lyft and Uber and the claim against the car behind them or the defendant's car. Now, let's say the Lyft or Uber driver was at fault, or even partially at fault, then the passenger could have a claim against the other side, as well as Uber and Lyft and the driver, okay, for personal injuries. So in a situation where it's comparative negligence, so the driver and the defendant are contributory at fault, the passenger can recover from both. The driver of this side, the driver of that side, as well as Lyft and or Uber.